name is Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
I hope I pronounce her name properly. Thais Gibson.
I am so excited for you to be here with me today. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Axe, I'm so grateful that you're here. And as I was saying to you just before we dove in here, I highly recommend your work. You were one of the first people that I personally came across in my own health journey 8 or 9 years ago when it first began. And a lot of your work was just instrumental in me getting into a really good space with my own personal health.
Well, I love that. That's why I do what I do. So, Thais, it's an honor to be on. Excited to talk all things health, wellness, growth. So thanks for having me on.
Awesome stuff. Thank you for being here. So I really wanted to dive into the topic today of methylation. It was something that our listeners know was like really transformative in my journey. And again, I'm not the expert here on this topic. So I wanted to just start by talking a little bit about what methylation is and why it's really important for our bodies.
Yeah, well, this is an important topic for everyone. And I also want to throw out there, I think there are a lot of misconceptions about methylation in terms of it being something that could be really traumatic to somebody's health in terms of or very hard to get around. There are actually a lot of things people can do that are easy fixes and people will have no issues there. But basically, there are different what are called methylation pathways in the body. The folate pathway is the one that people tend to reference the most. And if it basically it comes down to this, when you're consuming food or a vitamin or supplement and you consume certain nutrients like folate, for instance, is your body able to convert that nutrient into a usable form by your cells? And the answer is for a lot of people, they are at a disadvantage genetically at being able to convert it properly, especially if they're deficient in other nutrients or enzymes or really, it's enzymes and nutrients for the most part. And so imagine this, you're eating a food that's high in folate, maybe it's green leafy vegetables, and your body is missing certain enzymes and vitamins that are necessary to turn it into methylfolate, which is then used by your cells to create energy. And not just energy, it's used for so many things. It's very important for fertility. It's important for the creation of thyroid hormones. It's important for a lot of things. And so basically, again, when we're talking, and by the way, there are other methylation pathways. We talked about folate. There's another one called methionine. And this is you consuming protein from animals typically. And is your body able to take that amino acid from protein and turn it into glutathione, one of your body's master antioxidants? So the thing is, if you're missing certain things, your body isn't able to convert vitamins like folate and amino acids, so protein that come from protein, into usable form. So it's really not doing your body much good. And so when we look at the folate pathway genetically, what happens when we're talking about methylation, there tend to be sort of these genetic markers. Either you have, there are sort of two, now they call them mutations, like you have a genetic mutation. It's not a good word to use, because it's really what we would call a polymorphism, to where your body has, genetically is just a little different than other people. I mean, nearly 50% of people have this issue. So, I mean, it's incredibly prevalent. So most people either have one polymorphism or one issue with mutation, or they have both together. So they have two. And so so think about it like, okay, maybe you're restricted by 25% or 50%, and then somebody's like 80 or 90. So that's not perfect science. But my point is that you might genetically be predispositioned to not be able to convert folate or methionine into the nutrients you need, which will cause numerous issues. I mean, low testosterone, low thyroid hormone, high cortisol. I mean, number of problems. And again, we see this a lot with infertility. I see it a lot with hypothyroidism. And so there are certain things you need. One is a enzyme to help turn folate into methylfolate. And another thing you need are certain B vitamins. And the most important B vitamins are B2 is the most important, probably known as riboflavin. You also need vitamin B6 and B12. Okay. So if you have those other B vitamins, your body tends to be better at converting. And also you need a good, healthy microbiome. If your gut is unhealthy, you also don't convert as well, partly because then your body doesn't absorb and synthesize enough B vitamins correctly. And so now what the way that most people, practitioners, recommend you get around this issue is don't take folate as a supplement. Take methylfolate, which is already the converted form, and then your body doesn't even have to do, your body, it's okay if it's missing these things because you already have the form that your cells can use for energy production. So you're good to go. So that's the recommendation. Most physicians will say, hey, just take a methylated multivitamin or a methylated B complex supplement, or singularly take methylfolate. And that tends to be sort of what the recommendation is. But I actually think that, one, I think that's good advice. But I think if we want to go and actually really optimize your fertility and your thyroid hormones and testosterone, if we want to really optimize your body, that should be the secondary thing you do. Because you can really optimize methylation in your own body without taking a methylated B complex or multi. Now, I think, again, people that are at a disadvantage should do it. But I think that the biggest thing you need to focus on is your gut health and consuming food that are rich in riboflavin, B6, and B12. Because if you do that, you're actually still going to convert folate pretty darn well. So if people are getting plenty of probiotics and they're just taking a general B complex and getting 1.6 grams of 1.6 grams of vitamin B2, for the most part, they're going to convert very, very well, even if they're at the genetic disadvantage.
So I want to, just because a lot of our listeners will be new to this topic, and you explained that so well, and that makes a lot of sense to me. So will you just start for a moment by going into some symptoms? So if somebody's like, what does methylation mean? How will I even know if this affects me? What are some of those initial symptoms? Because I want to go into all the things that we can do and optimize and how to do that. But what might some people just be seeing in their lives if they're not already aware and they just have some of these kind of chronic nagging symptoms in the background?
The biggest is going to be cellular energy issues. Okay. So when you think about your cells, you have mitochondria, and they're known as your cell's engine, and they produce something called ATP. Okay. If you are deficient in ATP, you're going to feel tired. So the single biggest symptom across the board for most people is going to be fatigue. Okay. And so this whole range of just fatigue, feeling overwhelmed, not having energy, that's number one. The next thing actually can be mental health issues, because if you don't have folate properly transferred throughout the body, you need that for production of neurotransmitters like serotonin as the big one. And so there are people taking SSRIs, these antidepressant drugs, or anti-anxiety drugs as well, and they actually just have a folate or a B vitamin deficiency. So anxiety and depression are going to be very, very high on that list. The other thing is these B vitamins, especially folate, are important for focus. So if you aren't able to, serotonin and some of these neurotransmitters, if you aren't able to convert properly, you're going to have a really hard time focusing. So that can cause ADD or ADHD. It can also be linked to obsessive compulsive disorder, a few others, poor sleep. Now, this is true with folate, but also methionine. That's really big there as well. Your body can't properly create enough melatonin. And so poor sleep, if you just feel like you wake up at night or you just don't feel like you get rested, there's an issue there. I would say gut issues, but I really think the gut issues are the primary, and then this is more the secondary. It could be weight gain. Brain fog is a bigger one. I see that one oftentimes. Thyroid problems, because you need some of these B vitamins to support your body in creating thyroid stimulating hormone and taking T4 to T3, the usable form by the body. So thyroid issues are a big one. There are others, high blood pressure. I think if people just feel like emotionally off, but I would say the biggest issues are infertility, thyroid issues, low energy, mental issues, depression, anxiety, trouble focusing. Those are the biggest ones.
So just for our listeners to hear this too. So I have been on a health journey for a long time, improved a lot of different things over the years, and took a DNA test maybe a year ago and found out that I don't methylate properly, and introduced, I also was very low in my thyroid, specifically T3 only, introduced some of this work to actually working through these things. And it was amazing, the results that I had. My T3 started converting properly. I refused to go on thyroid medication because I knew there was going to be a better way. And it was life-changing for me. Got rid of brain fog first thing in the morning, had an easier time focusing, which is interesting too, because in university, I was diagnosed with ADHD and haven't really taken medication in my adult life, but saw a huge increase in improvement in focus and energy. Just felt like a cleaner energy throughout the day. Don't drink coffee much anymore, like all of these things. So for anybody listening, I just want to really recommend keep tuning in for this conversation, because as we go through strategies to change some of these things and really target root cause, which is a big part of what I love about your work, it's not like, hey, let's treat the symptoms. It's like, let's really boil down to the biggest root and treat that so the surface symptoms go away. There might be some really powerful insights that you hear. So
yeah. And let me mention one other thing. If you take the genetic test and you come back as having one markers or two, take a methylated B complex, but also I would recommend taking probiotics, at least 50 billion IU a day. I would also recommend taking a liver supplement or a multi-organ supplement, because really those are your methylation. That's the real methylation food, or is organ meats. And so now again, you don't have to taste them. You just take the tablet or take the capsule. But those two things, along with that B complex, I think would get people the best results.
Okay, I love that. I really love that. And you mentioned a moment ago, just before we sort of backtrack there for a second, about how the gut is a root cause. And I really want to dive into that for a moment. So what is the link between the gut, and what are some symptoms people may notice of having some gut issues, and how does that even boil back into methylation?
Well, Hippocrates said this 2,000 years ago, all disease begins in the gut. And looking back now, I mean, listen, is it 100% or all? I don't know if it's 100%, probably not, but is it very, very high? Yes, the answer is yes. And most autoimmune disease today, it's caused by something called intestinal permeability, which some people have called leaky gut. And when you look at a lot of issues today, not just autoimmune disease, when you look at migraine headaches, when you look at food sensitivities, when you look at as you mentioned, methylation issues. I mean, many of these really start in the digestive system, and our digestive system is responsible for absorption of nutrients. I mean, that's one of its big. Now, it's also your 70% of your immune system's there. So think about those two things in particular. Almost your entire immune system's in your gut, and almost all of your nutrients, all of them are absorbed in your gut. And so if your gut is off and you're not doing those two things, well, then you're going to have some major health issues. And so so many people today have a lot of intestinal inflammation. The diet that's in excess of sugar, seed oils, just a lot of these other fake foods. I mean, it's really going to cause a lot of intestinal inflammation. What starts to happen is, imagine your gut as a fishing net or a kitchen strainer that you put noodles in. Well, now imagine that you get tears in there. And so your gut has these little micro holes and only should allow certain things to pass through. Certain things like vitamins and minerals and proteins that are broken down into amino acids. And so, your body should then just have those in the bloodstream, and that's it. But what happens when you get these holes in your gut that are too big, they call them gap junctions, these get too wide and damage. Imagine it catches fire and now there's burns in it. So things start falling through the strainer. They start falling through the kitchen net. And these things, the first place they go is your gut lining is the barrier between your digestive system and your bloodstream. So what happens is, if you eat something like whole wheat bread that has a lot of gluten in it, or dairy, conventional dairy, or other things, you consume something that's a heavy metal. Well, what happens is those shouldn't be able to get into your bloodstream, but now they can. It's leaking. They're leaking into the bloodstream, and then your body says, whoa, these shouldn't be here. Yeah. And so then it sets off this inflammatory or an immune reaction. And over time, if that immune reaction continues over and over and over again, your body, and it doesn't get better, well, the body says, well, gosh, we're not doing enough. We haven't fixed the problem because this inflammation is still here. These invaders, these viruses, these heavy metals, these proteins, they're still here. So then they take a step outside and they say, we're going to attack things that are just even similar to this. Not even that itself, these proteins, even similar. So then your body will start attacking its own tissues. For instance, Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Your body starts attacking the proteins in your thyroid that might be like, well, it's not gluten, but it is a protein and it's maybe a similar structure. So now we're going to go and attack that. And it's going to attack your joints, causing rheumatoid arthritis. Or again, it could be anything. Your body's setting off signs via headaches or joint pain or just feeling bad. So our gut is really deeply connected to our, as I mentioned, our immune system, and then also nutrient absorption. Like, for instance, there's a study, and this is why I mentioned this is so important when it comes to methylation. 2 studies in particular. One recent study, very large scale study, found that if you take a probiotic, just a simple probiotic supplement, your vitamin B absorption, including folate, goes up by 30%. Another study out of Stanford found that it goes up by 50%. So literally, you're absorbing 50% more nutrients by simply taking a probiotic supplement. Now, combine that with a good probiotic supplement and eating probiotic-rich foods and reducing the inflammation via, eating just better foods like bone broth and organic meat and steamed vegetables, that sort of thing. Now all of a sudden, your body is absorbing maybe 80 to 90% more minerals and vitamins and all of these things. And so, but the issue there, as I mentioned, if your body's not even absorbing folate in the first place, well, of course, that's going to affect methylation because your body just doesn't even have the folate to try and convert there in the first place. And then even as we talk about these neurotransmitters, I mean, this is sort of shocking to a lot of people when they first hear the statistic, but 95% of your serotonin, which again is related to being in a good mood, it's the runner's high hormone. 95% of that is manufactured in your gut. So if your gut is off, I mean, it really affects mental health. Thais, when I first opened my functional medicine practice years ago, this is like 2007, the conditions that were most on the rise were type 2 diabetes, childhood obesity, cancer, heart disease. The past 5 to 10 years, it's mental health issues, depression, anxiety. I think there's a lot of cultural issues at play there. But in addition to that, there's no doubt that these sort of gut issues are closely related.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you hear a lot of practitioners say things like, oh, just do a food elimination diet, which in my opinion serves for a period of time. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts. But to me, it still isn't like, what are you going to do? Go your whole life and make sure that you walk on eggshells around everything. And while it sounds like there's important foods to avoid, it seems like that, again, is more of a Band-Aid solution than something really targeting root cause. So I'm curious to hear if somebody's going through these gut health issues, how do we repair intestinal permeability? How do we take digestive enzymes to absorb more nutrients from our foods? I know probiotics help with that, but what are your suggestions in that particular case?
Yeah, well, first of all, I do think there's a place for elimination diet. I view, like, for instance, I have a virtual clinic now where I have coaches. I don't in-person see people, but I do have practitioners that are part of my institute that I train and I do the weekly calls with them. And so I still see people in that way. All that being said, I had one person this week that I did say, okay, listen, she was a person that had really, really severe reactions to almost everything. Yeah. And so I said, listen, I mean, she was allergic to 70% of food. I mean, it seemed like. And so
I think that was me. Once upon a time as well. And it serves for a purpose for a period of time, but there's more to the story.
Exactly. So for her in particular, I said, okay, listen, we need to go and I want you to only consume these. Let's start with these 10 foods that I think you're pretty safe with. And then let's start expanding out. Most of the time I don't have to do that, but with her, we did. So just your point, it can be good sometimes. I think generally speaking, now a big part of my training is I've studied Western medicine. A big part, though, is in Chinese medicine. And so when you look at what people tend to do the best with food-wise, they're the foods that are the easiest to digest. Okay? So because really foods don't heal you, your body heals itself. So most of the time with the gut, it doesn't need much. Now, I will tell you some things that it needs in terms of building blocks, and we'll get to that. But for the most part, the bigger issue is typically not what it doesn't have. It's typically that it's having too many things. It's working too hard. It's exhausted. And imagine your adrenal glands are the same. Imagine your adrenals are totally worn out. You can take a lot of supplements and it'll help some, but you also need to sleep. You also need to not work 80 hours a week. So that's the point with that. So when it comes to gut health and repairing this, we need to eliminate typically sugar, added sugar only. We need to eliminate seed oils. We need to eliminate anything that's not just a food, just a real food, and typically eliminate a lot of raw foods and cold foods. So I recommend a lot of soups and a lot of foods that are lightly cooked. Let me give you an ideal example. I would have somebody for breakfast consume a sweet potato smoothie for breakfast. It's actually a soup, but have them put it in a cup, so it just seems more normal for breakfast. But or I'll have them do a pumpkin smoothie, or this sounds weird, steamed carrot or butternut squash or acorn squash. But those foods, that pumpkin, squash, sweet potato, they're typically very easy for most people to digest. Now, there's about a small percentage of people that don't do well with these starches or disaccharides, but it's not most people. Okay, most people can handle those foods. So I have most people do something like that with maybe like a vanilla collagen powder or a vanilla bone broth protein powder, maybe a little coconut milk. And that's what they'll do. It's kind of like a soup in a cup, okay? Or they can do it as a soup, but that for breakfast. Or maybe it's beef or chicken sausage with just all natural ingredients. It was some sweet potato hash sauteed up in coconut oil, okay? So very simple meals like that, baked fruit, like baked pears, applesauce with some good quality protein as well. That is what breakfast would look like, because all of those foods are very easy to digest. For lunch, I might have them do a bowl of chicken vegetable soup. Okay, rice, carrots, celery, parsley, chicken. I'll have them do that for lunch, and then maybe dinner, it's a grass-fed burger with a side of steamed vegetables and maybe some hummus. But really the foods that are easiest to digest are meat. That surprises some people, but for most people, meat is the easiest food for you to digest.
Yeah.
After that, well-steamed vegetables, certain fruits, sometimes that are cooked, applesauce, baked pears, maybe blueberries. Coconut tends to be easier for most people to digest. Could be coconut oil or coconut milk, olive oil, avocado. In terms of starches, I mentioned typically squash, pumpkin, sweet potato, and then rice. And now rice, I don't recommend. Recommend rice as something called rice congee, which means you put it in a slow cooker and cook it for 24 hours to where it's mush. This is the ancient Chinese remedy for almost any issue, immune issues, gut issues. They would have you do that. And sometimes they would just have you mix that with chicken broth or just water. But what I just shared, that's the basis in salt. Do that for the diet for the most part. A lot of those foods. Now, listen, that might seem restrictive, but it's not. I mean, you can eat almost any meat, almost any steamed vegetable, like some fruit, some of those. I mean, so start off there, and then you can expand out. But if somebody follows those foods I just mentioned, most of the time, I mean, they will see radical results with their gut health.
And at what point do you think that that's important for people who are having chronic digestive issues, maybe think they have a difficult time methylating, and how long do you recommend they do that for?
Well, I think until your symptoms are relieved, that's what I would recommend. But I do think you can expand out after just even a week or two, saying, okay, this is good here, I'm good here, and then adding in, maybe there's a few more fruits, maybe there's a few more vegetables you experience with. Maybe you try and add in, I don't know. I mean, if you want sourdough bread, something like that, and you could do that with turkey and something like so. I would say probably, give yourself a few weeks and then start to expand out. But generally, there's a lot of foods you can have. And then I would say something to remember in terms of things you definitely want to make sure you're getting. Your gut is made up of primarily collagen. It's the thing that's made up the most. It also has some amino acid called glutamine. It also has something called glucosamine. It's and chondroitin. Glucosaminoglycans, which are chondroitin, glucosamine, and hyaluronic acid. Those also make up your gut lining. And so those are things you need. Now, what's amazing is bone broth contains almost all of those things.
Interesting.
And so bone broth is the closest thing you'll ever have outside of eating intestines to actually getting the exact aminos you need for your gut lining. And so that's one thing I would do, is do a bone broth and a collagen supplement. Also, again, I mentioned this, I would definitely do a probiotic supplement, and I would do some soil-based probiotics. It's a type of probiotic, because those are really good at clearing out things like candida, which kind of allow that area to heal now. Those are the two biggest. And then if you are I do like digestive enzymes as well, especially if you're going to have some of the starches, even like sweet potatoes and some of the carbohydrates. So I think taking some digestive enzymes with meals can be good as well. And then there are certain herbals that are tremendously helpful at helping heal the gut lining. I think the best, especially if you also have autoimmune disease or a weakened immune system, is astragalus. This is one of the top 5 herbs prescribed in all of Chinese medicine. The second one is also a Chinese medicine herb. It's called licorice root extract. That's also especially good if you have SIBO. In addition to that, herbs like ginger, they're very good for, kind of prepping and helping the digestive system. But I think those would be my top 3 herbals for supporting the digestive health. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I'd start.
That's a fantastic place to start for people. And it's so funny. So just for our listeners too, so I went through an elimination diet and I didn't do any of the other things. So I ate about most of the foods actually that you mentioned. Minus I was like really worried about lectins and starches. So mostly meat, coconut oil, things like that. And I did that for like 6 years and just ate the same foods. And eventually I came to the realization, which is part of what I want listeners to hear today, like, if you're still having to go on an elimination diet in a permanent way, there's probably some other root cause issues to dig into. And that's where, that was a very beneficial thing for me to dig into in regards to candida and, repopulating my gut bacteria with proper probiotics and things of that nature. I just wanted to pop in here and let you know we are doing a 7-day free trial to the All Access Membership Pass at PDS, which means you get access to literally everything inside of the school. And this includes the 4 live webinars I do with our students every single week. And on top of that, you get access to all of our different courses. We have over 55 different courses on relationships, communication, boundaries, emotional mastery, guilt and shame, learning your needs, so many different facets that are really important to master our lives and feel really good about our lives going forward. And last but not least, there's a daily community event. We have trained facilitators and coaches who are in there doing that work, showing up to support you on your journey every single day. Please join me on the other side. Come check it out. See if it's a fit for you. I'd love to see you there. Go ahead and sign up by clicking the link in the description box below.
One of the things that will actually quicken this whole healing process is getting acupuncture. I mean, a lot of people don't really. So the way acupuncture works, and I'm not an acupuncturist, but I love acupuncture because I've seen great results and I've so many
heard
patients.
Amazing results from people over the years, which is so funny. I never understood how that works.
So acupuncture, now we call them needles. Acupuncturists don't like that, by the way, because that sounds intimidating. They call them instruments. But basically, they will go to an area of the body that's connected to the organ system. So like if somebody's having a heart attack, they'll have pain in their left arm. If somebody's having a gallbladder attack, they'll have pain in their right shoulder. And there's lots of examples of this, but there are sites of there's this area on your hand, like right here, kind of in between your thumb and your index finger, that's also connected to the stomach. So I remember when my wife was pregnant, she wore these things called C-bands to help with nausea because you have these places for your digestive tract right there. You just press on those points. So this has been practiced for thousands of years. Well, if you go and put instruments in those areas, it will stimulate and bring blood flow and energy and oxygen to that organ system that needs healing. I mean, really, part of the reason an organ typically gets sick is there's not enough movement, blood, oxygen, nutrients getting into the area. There's stagnation in the area. It's not moving enough. Acupuncture will help get those nutrients to that area. And oftentimes people with digestive issues, they have a cold digestive system. So just like hypothyroidism, their body temperature gets low. Mm-hmm. With digestive issues, not always, but oftentimes their digestive system, it gets too hot or too cold. So they can also sort of change the temperature of that area, help it in that way. But there's loads of benefits there. But that's kind of how acupuncture works.
And do you think when we were talking about elimination diets a moment ago, and we were talking, you said meat is actually easiest to digest. Do you think that that's why so many people are promoting a carnivore diet? And that's because that's the one thing that's simplest for them to digest, and that's what's happening behind it. And do you think that's even a sustainable or appropriate thing for people to do?
Well, yes, I think that's exactly why. And two, no, I don't think it's sustainable long term. So here's how this works. And this is, people are going to be like, well, duh, but no one's probably ever told you this. Different organ systems have to break down different foods. Your stomach primarily is the top organ, maybe a little bit your liver's involved, but your stomach is the most important organ for breaking down and digesting meat, okay? So if your stomach is weak or off, then you might have some problem digesting meat. Most people today, the organ system that is the most taxed is the pancreas. And your pancreas is responsible for especially producing, now it produces lipase and protease as well, which are responsible for digesting protein and fats. And so your stomach also produces amylase, which has to break down starches. And most people, the organ that's the most taxed via carbohydrates is the pancreas. And so the pancreas eventually is like, wow, I've got to produce a lot of amylase here, and it may not produce enough. So then those starches actually tend to, you can have this issue where H. pylori, a bacteria that starts to grow up in your stomach, causing more of these digestive issues, starts to spread. And so all that being said, and then your liver, gallbladder are responsible for digesting fat. So part of the question is, which organ is most stressed for you? Well, different emotions tax different organ systems. So think about this. Different emotions tax different organ systems. We know fear is your adrenal glands. Put your body in a fight or flight state. Your body will produce adrenaline and cortisol and these things. If you get really, if you've got fear in your life, fear of failure, fear of disappointing others, or if you have to just be on alert from driving in a traffic state. So we know fear creates more taxation on the adrenals. Every other organ is tied to an emotion. Anger taxes your liver and your gallbladder. Yeah, anger, resentment, frustration, anxiety. You're anxious about something. Blood pressure rises. We know that blood pressure starts going up. Also, we have the emotion of grief. Something has happened in the past. You're going through a divorce. You lost a loved one. You feel like maybe your life is a failure. Something happened in the past and it still bothers you today. It could be abuse, something like that. And you haven't been able to let go and move forward with your life. That taxes your lungs and colon, which is your immune system. And the emotion of worry, which is probably the emotion that women experience the most in particular, a lot of men too, that taxes the pancreas. And so if you're just worried about this, my bills and this relationship and getting this in on time and taking care of the kid, if you're just worried, that taxes that organ system. So all that being said, most people don't necessarily have a lot of stomach stress. Most of them have more pancreatic stress. Now, some people that are getting ulcers constantly, then they probably would have some issues with the high protein diet. But most people, it's going to be a different organ system. And so they're going to do just fine doing a lot of meat as the basis of their diet. Their stomach's strong. They're going to digest that just fine. And so that's part of it. But it just in general too, meat is just easier to digest. It just is.
That's so interesting. And it's so interesting because you see just how much the mind and body are so interconnected. And I know a lot of our listeners know this, but it's so interesting to hear. I just have a quick question. So how does it work? So anger, I've always heard, and I think I heard in like traditional Chinese medicine, anger is the liver and things that you shared. And how does that work? Is it the neurochemistry of the emotions tends to target those organs? Is that what's happening behind the scenes there?
Well, honestly, I've never been asked that, but I think I can come up with this. And so when you look at the liver is responsible for eliminating things from the body. It's responsible for detoxification. And let me think about this for a minute. So neurochemically, your liver is very tied to glucagon, very tied to insulin, very tied to creating glutathione. You know what? I may not have a good answer here. I'll just say that I think that your liver is responsible for dealing with toxic emotions, including anger. And and when I think about, let me think about this with anxiety. So we know anxiety, of course, that's going to be tied to, alertness. Your heart rate has to go up. Blood pressure is going to go up.
Cortisol, norepinephrine responses probably too.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, the adrenals are the easiest one. We know that. I mean, that's cortisol, that's adrenaline, that's norepinephrine and epinephrine. And so, but yeah, I would have to, I've never been asked that.
It's just so interesting because I spend a lot of my field is really in the mind and the neurochemistry of emotion and things like that. I'm going to research that after. I'm very interested in the topic.
Yeah. There's Chinese medicine, another more recent, and I don't believe that the work is 100%. Let me say this. I've not looked enough into the work. There's something called German New Medicine. And this is this is their philosophy as well, to a degree, is that almost every health condition has an emotional root, and it does.
Yeah.
I don't, but I haven't looked enough into it to know, but that's something else you may look into.
I have a wonderful book on the spiritual psychotherapy sort of side of things. Just I like to dabble and I'm curious there. It's actually on my bookshelf back there, but it's called Metaphysical Anatomy. And it talks about the correlation between when you're experiencing health challenges, what the emotional tie is. And it's funny because I used to work in client-based practice and I would read people the book when they would have some sort of physical ailment, and like it was almost always accurate. It was really mind-blowing. So there's definitely a big connection.
Really, yeah. I mean, it's metaphysics. I mean, I think if you did, rather than think about it from a biochemical level, which I think if I thought about, if I got to think about it for a bit, I'd be able to tell you.
Something.
But I think if you're thinking about anger, frustration in patients, unforgiveness. Yeah. By the way, unforgiveness is a unique one. In Chinese medicine, it taxes the liver and it taxes the immune system because you have resentment towards something that's happened in the past. Okay. It's anger towards the past or someone from something happening in the past. So it's going to talk both of those. And of course, people have said, unforgiveness is like drinking your own poison. I mean, you're poisoning yourself, not the other person. But I do think, I do know this. In Chinese medicine, if you have anger, it causes stagnation to where it causes rumination in that area. And so it causes lack of movement. So a lot of people will start to develop issues like constipation or excess heat. The liver's responsible also for getting rid of toxins. And if not, it builds up inflammation and heat in the body. So that's another, some other things that it's connected to.
So interesting. So interesting. And I've experienced personally as I work through my own emotional things, like things from childhood or things I've done work on, just seeing that impact my health in many ways. So there's definitely this two-way connection.
Now that I am thinking of this more with the liver, see, the liver, it is connected to hormones. Again, insulin, glucagon. I mean, there is, but part of it's also responsible for detoxifying the body from things that impact your hormones. I mean, one of the biggest causes today of estrogen dominance is a toxic liver.
Yeah.
Because if you're consuming a lot of excess microplastics and forever chemicals, what they do is these are called xeno or phytoestrogens. It's going to raise your estrogen. If your liver can't handle it all, because your liver is responsible for detoxifying these excess estrogens. And so that's definitely one way in particular it's affected.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. So I want to give people some really tangible things to walk away with in regards to if they could do, let's say they're trying to do a 7-day gut reset or a 7 set of steps for how to start methylating or, how to sort of bring these two things together. What would be some action steps that you would give to them?
Yeah. Number one, just make these simple dietary changes. I mean, for starters, change your breakfast. Get some foods that will heal your gut in the morning. Do a scoop of a bone broth protein or a scoop of a collagen, but try and get about 20 grams of collagen, 20, 30 grams. And then you can do another protein powder if you want something that's easily digested, maybe sprouted or an animal product. But I would say doing it, or if not, just do 20 to 30 grams of a collagen or bone broth based protein. In addition to that, a little bit of coconut milk. If you want to do fruit, do room temperature blueberries. If not, I would do or applesauce. If not, again, try the sweet potato, try the, I would try something like that there. And then about 1/4 teaspoon of pumpkin pie spice is amazing. And you got ginger in there, you got cinnamon. So that would be a great thing to do. Try and get a lot of bone broth. Try and get a lot of basically meat and cooked vegetables. Well-cooked vegetables and meat. If that's the basis of your diet, you're going to heal tremendously. Get some of the healthy fats, coconut, olive oil, little avocado, that sort of thing. I mean, if that's the basis of your diet, you're going to be great. I would also say you can do some other fruits too, I think would be fine. And then,
what are your
and if you want to venture out into grains, rice is the easiest if you cook it a long time, but you also could try going grain-free for a period of time.
And what are your thoughts about lectins out of curiosity, just on the topic of food?
Yeah. So listen, my belief system is fairly different than others. Again, mine is very Chinese medicine based, and I have not typically had, let me say this. If somebody is severe, they can have issues with lectins and phytic acid and nightshades and all those things. Okay. But I tend to find that if they're doing most of the other things, eventually those will be just fine. I don't think that's the primary most of the time. I don't think that I've found everyone that I've worked with has healed, whether I did the nightshade free or not. Now, I will say this. Sometimes if somebody is in a really inflamed state, the nightshades will bother them. Okay. They will. And so it is better to get them out. And then of course you're talking about lectins. You're talking about, again, these things that are found in grains and really nuts and seeds and can be found in beans. I mean, all kinds of foods. And even so that are, might be difficult to digest. However, if a food is properly prepared, it kills off most of those things. Sourdough bread's an example. I mean, I actually think that, sourdough bread is a healthy food for most people. I mean, if you let me just say, here's the issue today. If you have most people are just eating conventional grain. It's conventional grain, okay? It's been hybridized. It's higher in gluten. It's higher in starches. And it's very difficult to digest. But if you take a grain, an ancient grain that our bodies are adapted to, like einkorn, and then you sprout it, and you harvest it when it's ripe, and then you ferment it, the fermentation process breaks down the gluten almost completely, breaks down almost the starches completely. Now you've got all these amazing probiotics, mostly the lactobacillus species, but also Saccharomyces boulardii. I mean, you got loads of probiotics in there. I mean, there's a study, and I would look this up, anyone who's listening, on celiac disease eating sourdough bread. And you will find there are people with celiac and a lot of people with IgG intolerance to gluten. Mm-hmm. And when they consume true long fermented sourdough bread, they do not have either they have zero reactions or the reactions are minuscule compared to if they're eating normal bread. And when you ferment something, you're creating probiotics. Now every nutrient's absorbable because you've broken down the phytic acid and some of those other enzyme inhibitors. You now have enzymes, probiotics, all of those things in the bread. So I just want to say, we make these comparisons today to grain-fed meat versus grass-fed beef, right? We make maybe comparisons even to conventional cow's milk to goat's milk kefir that's raw and organic and free of hormones and antibiotics and GMO feed. But the comparison of the grains to the fermented sourdough, the sprouted sourdough, it's just as much, or it's a much healthier and a different type of food than even comparing the grain-fed versus grass-fed meat. So it's a different food.
And what do you think? And I'm not an expert on this area at all. I know very little, but what do you think about things around like how the crops are sprayed, like glyphosate or things like that? Is something that is taken out of the process if we sprout things or ferment them? Like I'm not sure how that part works.
No, it's not going to take it out. Well, let me say this. It does reduce it. And this is true of a lot of microbes. Okay. Mushrooms are probably the best at this. I mean, it's amazing. If you go and look at studies on mushrooms, they can cleanse the soil. I mean, if you have an oil spill, if you have glyphosate, glyphosate, if you have these chemicals in the soil, mushrooms go and break them down and turn them into harmless, harmless nothings. Yeah. I mean, mushrooms are, look this up. Go and look at mushrooms' ability to go and cleanse the earth of toxins. I mean, it is unbelievable. Now, other bacteria and yeasts actually have very similar properties. Now, would I say that if you have grain that's sprayed with glyphosate, is it free of glyphosate after sprouting and fermenting it? No. But have some of those harmful chemicals been deactivated? Yes, but not enough. And so my answer is buy organic grain. I mean, if you're going to eat it, buy things that have not been sprayed, of course. That's
very interesting. Okay, that's very good for people to know as well. And in terms of the methylation piece, just sort of bringing that back to come full circle there. You said earlier, if your gut is in good shape, you're going to have an easier time methylating and making sure you get some of those B vitamins besides just the methylated vitamins, like you said, B2, riboflavin, B6. What else would you recommend to somebody who maybe takes a genetic test and sees that they don't methylate properly or thinks that they're having a lot of those symptoms that you mentioned in the earlier part of our discussion? Do they go take a methylated like methylcobalamin or trimethylglycine? Like where do they start? Or do you think by cleaning up the gut, focusing on that first, everything else will tend to fall into place?
Well, I do think fixing the gut is the first thing.
Mm-hmm.
But why not in conjunction with it do the secondary thing, which is taking the methylated vitamin? I mean, I would absolutely do both. I mean, I'm very much into protocols and not just doing the one thing. Why not do all the right things in order to heal? So I would say follow the diet, take a methylated B complex, get some organ meats via liver capsule, however you want to get them, and get a probiotic. Again, B complex that's methylated or a methylated multi, probiotics or multi-organ supplement. Those three things will make the biggest difference altogether. And listen, if you're not going to change your diet, then do those three things. Take those supplements, and you'll still notice a pretty significant improvement.
I love that. I think that's fantastic and a really good thing to share with people in terms of easy action steps that they can start taking. So I have two very last questions before we wrap.
Sure.
One very brief one is you just mentioned collagen earlier, and I always hear that like high dose L-glutamine is the best way to go in terms of strengthening gut permeability.
Yeah.
But you seem to prioritize collagen. Is there a reason that that's more impactful, and is it more impactful than L-glutamine?
I don't know if I believe it's more. I believe it's equally, and I believe we don't know which is more impactful. But I do know, and I tend to be more of a whole food nutrition person. So again, a lot of people like, hey, let's just take only resveratrol. I'm like, no, let's do the eat grapes. Most people are like, take the single B vitamin. I'm like, no, eat liver, because it's got not only every B vitamin, but also choline and selenium and all the other things you need for methylation. So that's my philosophy, doing an extract of glutamine only. Now, by the way, bone broth does have a load of glutamine in it. Now, primarily, though, it's proline, glycine, and hydroxyproline. But the reason I mention that is it's what your gut is made of, the actual tissue. It's made of collagen. So that's why I recommend that. Now, in terms of helping those tight junctions and seal that gut, there are microbes and things that like to use glutamine as fuel. So they serve different functions. I think for some people, collagen might benefit them more. For others, and by the way, not just collagen, I actually like bone broth powder or bone broth protein even more than collagen for this. Okay.
Interesting.
But that with glutamine together, again, it just depends on the person. But those together definitely should help a lot of people in terms of sealing up the gut.
And then you're covering all the bases, which I love. And I think that that's super impactful. And have you seen people that when they do these protocols, they see the actual symptoms they're having from an autoimmune perspective actually reduce as a result? Because I think a lot of people don't talk about that enough.
Well, yeah. I mean, I have seen in my career, going on 17, 18 years. I mean, I've seen thousands of people reverse type 2 diabetes. I've seen, I don't want to throw out a number. I don't know. I mean, here's the thing. There's a difference. I mean, in clinical practice, I saw it regularly. Autoimmune disease reversed, normal antibodies. Like my own brother, here's an example. My own brother had Hashimoto's thyroiditis. He started following what I shared with him, and he reversed it. Now he's a functional medicine doctor in Tampa. And my sister, actually another relative, had Graves' disease. She reversed it. I mean, so I have family members that have reversed autoimmune disease. I've helped, hundreds of women with fertility, then get pregnant. I've helped, and by the way, none of this is boasting. It's just, it's the diet.
What I want you to share.
It's those things. And so, yeah, of course. I mean, people will have autoimmune. My own mom had cancer. That was reversed naturally. I mean, that's part of my story and what happened. And she had breast cancer first and then lung, and then just basically did a diet of cooked vegetables, juice vegetables, and bone broth and salmon and berries. And then she, and turmeric and astragalus and reishi mushroom and so she healed. So your body has an amazing capacity to heal. Here's the thing. You're like a plant. But Chelsea and I, the first time I tried gardening, I just went in my yard and planted some things, and almost nothing grew. It was just terrible, absolutely terrible. And when I went and realized it was just this light colored sort of like dirt. Okay. Then years later, we said, okay, we're going to do a garden this time. We started with an herb garden, and I went and bought the creme de la creme of, mushroom extracts in my soil. I spent way too much money on just this, bunch of bags for this herb garden. We had basil and cilantro and chives, and I planted eggplant, all kinds. I mean, just like growing bigger. I couldn't believe the size and how much it was just better soil. It's your environment. If you just change your environment via the food you're eating for your gut, your internal environment, the herbs help change your internal environment, your stress levels, you get better sleep, the people you're spending time with, positive mindset. when you change your environment, you're just a plant. You're the same thing. Your body will grow and flourish and bear fruit if you do the right things. And so listen, if somebody came to with type 2 diabetes, I mean, 99% of the time I feel like, okay, we're going to reverse this. It's just, it's automatic.
Problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Now, again, listen, I want to be sensitive and say some people are worse than others. Some people, it takes longer to heal. And it can be hard. Listen, dietary change is changing a big part of your life. And sometimes people are different. I also am a big believer in a personalized diet. Like when I lay out diets for people, it's customized. I mean, I don't think anybody should be on the same diet, Harley. I mean, almost everybody is a unique individual. Like I learned this in practice if I had a cancer patient come in, I would have them do some raw vegetables and vegetable juices. But if I had somebody with inflammatory bowel disease come in and I put them on raw vegetables,
it's not going to work out so nicely.
No, first of all, I never did because of what it would have done. My point is, a lot of times people just jump on a diet like I'm going to do keto or vegan or carnivore because their friend did it. You're really unique. So, I mean, you just keep that in mind. And so This is why having awareness, listening to your body, seeing a practitioner who's dealt with exactly what you're dealing with. I mean, I deal with a lot of hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, infertility, diabetes, autoimmune disease, gut issue, those sort of things today. That's kind of more what I specialize and look at. But again, you want to see somebody who's really in particular able to kind of hone in and create something really special and specific for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So I want to say a huge thank you for being here. Please tell our listeners what you're up to, where they can find more about you, work with you, or some of the coaches and
Sure.
practitioners that you have, and where to find you on socials.
Yeah, my podcast, which I know you're coming on, which I'm excited about. That's the Dr. Josh Axe Show. It's on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. You can just search Dr. Josh Axe. And we cover a lot of topics like this constantly. In fact, I think if you go on my YouTube channel or Apple and you search Dr. Josh Axe, and maybe you wanted to hear more about, I don't know, hypothyroidism or low testosterone or methylation, just search my name. You'll find information there about that. My handle's at Dr. Josh Axe on social. I do have a wellness clinic. If people go to Axe Wellness and they want to learn more, I do a lot of challenges and things like that. They could learn more at Axe Wellness about that. But those are the big things.
Perfect. And you have a fantastic YouTube channel and Instagram as well. That if you can just tell listeners where those are at.
Yeah. You just search Dr. Josh Axe on YouTube and Instagram, and you'll find a lot of the content there too.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your time in this episode and look forward to our listeners hearing this.
Thanks so much, Thais.
If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Share it with friends and family who are on their journey of personal development and growth, and thank you for listening. Next week, we'll be back with more insights to guide you on your journey. And until then, keep practicing our tools and strategies to change your subconscious mind and apply some of the powerful learnings from this podcast so that you experience real life transformation.